Okay, and we do have excused absences for Catherine Starkey, Karen Seal, Melanie Griffin, Mayor Kreisman, and Mayor Castor, and Secretary Nandan. But we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Can you also give the public service
Yes.
announcement?
Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and give it to the staff. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. The public comment period could be extended for up to 30 minutes. And I do have 2 comments.
Okay,
Two comments.
please bring them forward.
So we'll call up Ron Weaver first.
Jennifer, if you could bring the cards to me, I'll call them. Chair recognizes Juan Reaver. It's good to see you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Chairman Holton, members of the TBARTA. I wanted to thank you for letting me address you. I am Ron Weaver, 401 East Jackson Street. I rise on the occasion of a week in which judges and great public officials have convened upon the subject of what will be the next 30 years of the funding of transportation in our region, starting with the Hillsborough County outcome of a litigation which decided that the appropriate destination for funds in a November 6th ballot at the ballot box by 281,000 voters with respect to the destination for a 1-cent sales tax voted on by 281,000 voters in Hillsborough County should be a certain percentage, including 45% to HART, our fine host here, and 20% for certain other uses, including congestion relief, safety, and 12% for bike paths and pedestrian ways, taking this area, Hillsborough County, from 48th in funding of bikeways and pedestrian ways to 4th in the nation if that 12% of that $261 million a year for 30 years were to go to that destination. From 48th to 4th in pedestrian and bike paths, 45% to HART with respect to bus and rail needs that this community has put off for the last 20 years of funding courage. And while a decision will be made to effectuate that court order, and that court order may be appealed with respect to the destination of those funds, it is important for us as a region to bear in mind that what happens with respect to the destination of those funds should, wherever possible, be in keeping with the 281,000 voters of Hillsborough County who sought to have the transportation destination of those monies include 45% for HART for bus, rail, and other necessities, 12% for bike and pedestrian ways, as just discussed, and the other 2 or 3 largest items being congestion relief and safety. Congestion relief and safety. And while there are other great demands and priorities that should be considered, I think that this regional force, with its enormous power and its enormous influence and its enormous ability to make sure that any monies that are destination smart now are also destination smart in consideration of the region and the overall effects on the region with respect to the destination smart, as a court ordered that the County Commission of Hillsborough County deem appropriate the destination for these monies rather than the percentages that were in this initial ballot on November the 6th when 281,000 voters spoke. I just wanted to encourage you as members of the region to continue as you have to work together to find the right destination for those monies, and if possible, to honor the 281,000 voters' wishes with respect to the destinations for those crucial funds as an important part of the fabric of our overall regional funding courage, not just Hillsborough County's funding courage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of TBARTA.
Chair recognizes Tom Nacera.
Good morning, everyone. It's always a tough role to follow someone with so much passion as Attorney Ron Weaver. I just wanted to say this morning that SkyTrain has informed us that they're in the process of erecting a demonstration track for their aerial guideway system. This is happening in San Antonio. We are expecting further word on the specific date when the actual demonstrations will begin. We expect it to come sometime in July as of now. So that's just a few weeks away. It's been a long time that we've been waiting for actual concrete proof that the system does what we've been told that it's going to do. And so very soon now we'll be able to see that in San Antonio. It's going to be on private property. One of the investors in SkyTran has dedicated the property for this track to be built. One other point that I'd like to bring to everyone's attention is we had a very productive meeting with Catherine Starkey. I'm sad that she's not here today, but We have extended an invitation to all members of TBARTA's board to come and visit with us and to understand better what our aspirations are, what our vision is for relieving traffic congestion by providing a solid alternative to privately owned vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Is there anyone else wishing to make public comment that has not turned in a card? None being heard, I'll close public comment. Next order of business is the consent agenda item, and our only item there is approval of the prior minutes. Are there any corrections?
Move approval, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Motion, a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nay, no. Ayes have it. Then it's approved. Our next item of business is some presentation items, and I am very happy to recognize Ed Turanchek.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of TBARTA. Do I just use the cursor?
Yes.
The arrows? My name is Ed Turanchek. I'm an attorney with Ackerman LLP, legal counsel for the private partners in a public-private partnership between HMS Ferries and Southwell Development Group to establish ferry transportation services in the Tampa Bay area. I am pleased that Commissioner Kemp and Commissioner Long are here. They've had long involvement in this project and know a lot about it, and Commissioner Kemp particularly so, since this is a public-private partnership. We are calling this the Cross Bay Ferry because it is taking a lot of market currency from the demonstration projects that we have done. So this whole public-private partnership proposal for ferry service we are referring to as the Cross Bay Ferry project. We are poised to provide Tampa Bay with the first congestion-proof regional transit system and have it running in 3 years. I'm going to give you the top lines, then go into the details, and would like you to understand a little bit about the history of it. Essentially, the proposed business plan provides frequent frequent commuter service from South County to McDill during the day, and at night provides service between South County, St. Petersburg, and Tampa on evenings and weekends. And that's the proposed initial business plan. We'll get back to that. You'll find that TBARTA has a very important role in implementing this service, but I'll get to that as well. This is an innovative project that uses an existing asset that we have turned our backs on for a long time, known as Tampa Bay. It is innovative because this is the only transit project in the Southeast and perhaps the United States for which no local or state operating dollars are required to run. That just does not happen because HMS is taking the operating risk on this. And it's also a innovative and precedent-setting project because the infrastructure cost of $36.5 million is a lower capital cost than any capacity project and even most maintenance projects in the region. We'll go through that as well. Tampa Bay is a natural market for passenger ferry service. Around the world, major regions use their bays and waterways for transit. Sydney, New York, San Francisco, Vancouver, Seattle, Hong Kong, Istanbul, Singapore all have robust ferry service to move people. It's just obvious, and it's a crying shame that we haven't done that, but maybe we weren't ready before, and I think we're ready now. But even in America, the ferry services happens in some remarkable places. Seattle and Vancouver has robust ferry service, San Francisco, Boston, New York City, but Jacksonville, Oklahoma City has a ferry service. People use their waterways because people like waterways and they're congestion proof, and they reinforce really positive economic development and land use patterns. The advantages of water transit, just to make sure the obvious is stated. The right-of-way is free. It doesn't cost us anything. It doesn't cost anything to build on that right-of-way. It's congestion-proof. The rolling stock is less costly than bus or rail equivalents on a per-passenger basis and the customer experience is exceptionally high. People like to go on the water. The history of this actually goes back to 1990. Jim Hargrave created the Tampa Bay Commuter Rail Authority. The chairman, Holt, and I was the past chairman of the Tampa Bay Commuter Rail Authority, and we had a mandate to evaluate passenger ferry service, and back then, we couldn't figure out how to make it work. In 2008, Hillsborough County got a congressional earmark to look at water transportation. Congressman Bill Arakis and Castor and Senator Nelson were the co-sponsors of that earmark. They don't do earmarks anymore, but that's still there. By the way, earmarks never expire. They just go on and on and on. But based on that earmark, Hillsborough MPO did 2 feasibility studies, kind of a spaghetti model looking at every potential route option, and then they focused on McDill because there are 8,000 employees in South County that have to go all the way around the top of the bay to get to the base. So it's a really defined market that has federal transit vouchers where the commute distance this way is 45 minutes to an hour, but across the bay is 13 minutes. So it was just a natural, obvious option. But the local governments didn't quite know what to do with it, and that's where the private sector came in. And we proposed a public-private partnership agreement in which HMS said they would take the operating risk. And based upon that, Hillsborough County, HMS Ferries, and Southwell Development Group entered what was the first public-private partnership agreement under Florida's new public-private partnership agreement law that went in effect on July 1st of 2013. We got an award of federal dollars that moved the project over to the county, and for a lot of complicated reasons, it didn't move forward for 3 years. But on Commissioner Kemp's motion in January 2018, the county moved the project back over to the private sector partners, eschewed and released the federal dollars because of, I can answer questions about that, it just wasn't going to work. And since then, the project's been on a very fast track. Last summer, we looked at over a dozen sites again. Picked 3. We did a quick solicitation, got a consulting group on. Between September of 2018 and February, we looked and did complete business plans for 3 site options: environmental assessments, environmental or transportation engineering ridership studies on 3 different sites. The intention was that we would come back to the Board of County Commissioners to say, pick door A, door B, or door C. It's your choice. But after we did the business planning, it was pretty evident one site was the proper one, and that was Williams Park. These are the 3 sites that were looked at: Schultz Preserve, Williams Park, and Cracker. And the primary purpose was to establish commuter service between South County and MacDill Air Force Base. The interesting thing that happened in the interim was the Cross Bay Ferry pilot project, because that informed so much about the nature of this market. Sometimes government invests in pilot projects and pilot ideas that just don't work, and sometimes they do, and they work in spades, and this did. So I'm going to talk about both the results of the site selection, which is Williams Park, which is an existing park the county leases from the state of Florida. It's located on the Alafia River. It's got nominal environmental impacts, good access to transportation, but it's small. It's an 8-acre site, and this is going to be very significant from the standpoint of the importance that TBARTA will play in moving people from South County into Williams Park via van pools. So I'm going to get to that in the presentation, but the fact that we have a small site means that to meet the carrying capacity and demand for ferry service, this connectivity to it's going to be very important, and we think van pools are going to work exceptionally well, and I'll go into why we think that. So we understood the MacDill side, right? 8,000 people in South County wanting to go to McDill. What opened the doors to this 7-day-a-week, 18-hour-a-day service was the Crossberry Ferry experience. We had a second season. It was an innovative project because 5 different governments helped fund it, including the Florida Department of Transportation, Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, St. Petersburg, and the city of Tampa. The cost went down from $1.4 million in the first season to $750,000 this last season. We had flexibility in the operating schedule, and unlike other transit trends, which are down, this transit trend was up. We went from carrying 38,000 to 52,528 people. 70% of the inventory was sold out on Fridays and Saturdays. You can't find a bus line in the west coast of Florida that has 70% of its capacity sold at any time. In fact, Commissioner Long and I were just talking about this. Often people would try to go get a ticket and they couldn't. And people were booking 2 and 3 weeks out in April just to get on. We did have low ridership on Sunday because of a sighting issue, but the results of that, though, were just stunning. First of all, this is we did a ridership survey, and that's one of the important things about this pilot project, because it wasn't some consultant trying to project what people might think if we had some transit service in the future. It was asking real live riders what they liked and how it worked. It's great market data. So about 60% of the people were headed to Tampa, 40% went to St. Petersburg. I don't think this next data could have been better. 60% of the people only made the trip to the other city because the ferry existed. We heard many, and we have 33 pages of single line comments from customers. People don't want to cross the bridge. They don't want to get in traffic, they don't want to get in congestion, but they took the ferry to go do something in the other city. But equally important, 40% of the people were going to make the trip across the bridges, but took the ferry instead. So the ferries both induced economic activity and relieved congestion. And the ideal thing would have just been 50-50, but it was 60-40. They did a lot of different things when they got there. They dined, they went to museums, they shopped, they went to sporting events. Very, very few of the passengers were just joyriders. Most of the people were using the ferry to go do something, and most of them wouldn't have done it but for the ferry. Once they got there, they spent a lot of money. 50% of the passengers spent between $15 and $40 per person, and 30% spent more than $40 per person. That means the businesses in those places were doing very well, and far better than if they went to sporting events, because when you go to a Lightning game or a Rays game, they want to capture that money, right? And people were taking the ferry, they were going everywhere. In each of the cities, I have to get a chart in there. They went to Ybor City and in St. Petersburg. It wasn't just the immediate downtown. They connected to all the different places. Uber and Lyft makes a huge difference in providing connecting service to a wide range of destinations. So the combination of this really robust evening and weekend service and a strong commuter base for McDill is the foundation for the business plan that the county commission approved and on which we're proceeding to work. And so I'm going to go through that business plan. This was submitted on April 15th. The Board of County Commissioners voted to proceed with the development of this project. We're going to start with 4 purpose-built vessels. They will be shallow draft, front-loading, single deck. Envision this: the ferry pulls in, the people get off, and they get on, and the boarding time is less than 30 seconds. So you're going to unload and unload 149 people in under 30 seconds. That design's really important because you don't want to waste you don't want to waste your vessels loading. It's like a jet plane. You spend as much time loading at the airport as in actual travel. ferries are going to be designed to load and unload very quickly. The McDill run goes from Williams Park to McDill, and the service is extraordinary. This is the best transit service in the west coast of Florida. Boats will leave the Williams Marina to McDill and vice versa every 10 to 15 minutes. And we found from passenger surveys, frequency is everything. It's the travel time's less important than frequency of service. And by the way, we've now done 4 ridership surveys, and this recurrent theme comes up. Ridership is conditioned on frequency more than any single factor. So this is a really robust schedule, and we need 4 vessels to meet this schedule because, you know, they're just going 13 minutes back and forth across the bay, back and forth, back and forth. And so we have a lot of lift capacity, and importantly, as demand grows, the cost of adding to that capacity is really cheap. It's $4 million per boat and no operating dollars. So you have an incredible capacity to ramp up, ability to ramp up the capacity of the system in 18 months for $4 million. But that's from a growth perspective. When we get to McDill, we come into the Davis Conference Center, and as part of the project, the operator will also operate an on-base tram system because we have to solve it. A regional solution has to have a local connection. Otherwise, you're being dropped off and no place to get to the final destination. So the ferry project takes people from Williams Park to McDill and circulates them around McDill, all as part of the capital and operating cost of the plan. The evening service then starts when the McDill boats are done. And they basically are at a minimum of 2 boats just going around Tampa Bay area. The fare is contemplated to be $15 for a walk-up fare that would be the daily round-trip fare that would include the ferry, parking, and tram service. The federal transit voucher covers 100% of this fare. So for the McDill employees, I get to go to work for free and I take less time. That's why we have absolute confidence that this is going to be very successful, and it shows up in the ridership surveys and the ridership models. In the evenings, the same fare models anticipated of $8 per trip, $5 for seniors, military and college students, $3 for children ages 4 through 17. And that's the business model that HMS is riding on to say, we don't need operating subsidies. We can make this service work. I mentioned to you the fact that Williams Park is a small site. And we have a premium transit option that can at a site that can only accommodate 750 cars unless you build a parking deck. And that might happen in the future, but right now, no one wants to do it. And we have far greater lift. So how do people get from where they live to the ferry terminal? And again, the ridership surveys found out that around 40% of at least the McDill commuters would take transit. And the transit options are twofold. One is redirecting existing HART service. HART will save money, can put on more service for the same amount of money that they're spending now, but that service is limited. In the eventuality that the referendum is upheld and that money becomes available, HART can start ramping up transit connecting service from where people live to the transit terminal at Williams. But we don't know whether that will happen or when that will happen. But what we do know that exists is the van pools. And we think the van pools are phenomenal. We have built a financial model whereby the employees could take advantage of the van pools and pay nothing. And I think approximately now, David, I think approximately half of the TBARTA van pools already are going to McDill. And our business model calls for an aggressive marketing plan to ramp up the van pools, and it works so well there. because there's a federal transit voucher. A lot of the people in South County live in master plan communities with community centers and homeowners associations and CDDs. They all report to someone by the name of Colonel or General who can say, we'd like you to consider this. And the whole land use and system lends itself very well to activating a robust number of van pools. So we, in framing this business plan, had worked with the TBARTA staff to understand how the van pools work and can work and how they can be ramped up. And with your existing models, and we understand they may change, with your existing finance model, essentially we will pay for the employee portion of the van pool cost as part of the ticket. That's the van pool ferry on-base shuttle ticket. And this means you can just really ramp up the program. To wrap this up, there's also terminals that will be located in downtown Tampa and downtown St. Petersburg. Those cities need to pick those and finance those, subject to accessibility and operational needs. We anticipate proposing helping those governments with design issues. Any terminal cost, though, associated with locations in downtown Tampa or St. Petersburg would be those entities' responsibility. This is the capital budget for the project. It's $36.6 million, $104 million O&M cost over 20 years. And by the way, as part of HMS guarantee, they'll cover operating, maintenance, and repair of all water transit facilities in the water transit side of things. I put in a chart to just show this by comparison. If you amortize the capital cost over the distance traveled, or even more importantly, the avoided distance traveled, the cost per mile for this ferry service is $4.5 to $1.5 million per mile. It's pretty cheap. It's pretty cheap. Where are we? We get because this is a public-private partnership in which the private sector is taking lead for project implementation. We are handling the consultant procurement. We're not flying alone, however. The county has retained AECom to be the owner's representative. And by the way, it's an extraordinarily wonderful model because we work directly with a third-party consultant who understands what we're doing, and they interface with the county. And so we have moved through this really, really quickly. We should select our new consultants by Tuesday. We expect the second interim agreement to be before the county commission on August 7th. We plan to have our environmental permits submitted by the first quarter of 2020. We have good indications from environmental review firms, environmental review agencies, including the Army Corps of Engineers, that the Williams site looks pretty clean. And so we're hoping that within 2 years, we'll be in a point of starting construction in 2021, and then we would commence permanent ferry service in 2022. Key issues. One is capital funding. The county commission has set aside $23 million of BP oil money for the capital portion. That obviously doesn't cover $36 million, but it's a really good amount of seed money. As you heard Mr. Weaver talk about, and as everyone knows, the county referendum passed, and so assuming that's sustained, there will be ample capital dollars to pay for the capital side of this. I'm sure the county commission would rather have Hart pay for the capital costs rather than they pay for the capital costs, but that's something that will get sorted out. We think there's the potential for multimodal transit funding from FDOT on some sort of basis. FDOT has had a very supportive and material role in regional transit projects in Central Florida and South Florida, actually providing billions of dollars to those communities. As we speak, the state of Florida is providing over $40 million a year of operating assistance for Tri-Rail. So the notion that the state of Florida would provide some level of capital match to stand up this regional project seems to be sensible. And Secretary and I and Mr. Gao have talked about that possibility, but it's premature. No one's making any commitments. I'm simply saying that's a logical source of potential match. We think this part of the capital funding also has to become from some kind of amortized fair share of the capital cost, because some of the service is regional nature, and we don't know what that formula would be, but the capital contribution, for instance, from St. Petersburg or Pinellas County would be fairly small and measured by some portion of the capital costs of the boats being used to make that service work. And we'll look at that and have that discussion as we go. We do think, however, there's only a limited prospect of federal funding for the project, because under federal law, to use a park for a transportation facility has a lot of barriers to it. And the FTA, in fact, told us that we can't use the federal dollars for either of these sites. So we don't think there's going to be much of an opportunity to secure federal funding for the initial implementation of the project. But once up and running, funding boats, funding repair, expanding the service will be a different thing. And Jacksonville, in fact, was just awarded $4 million for their ferry project. And they didn't have to go through any of the environmental compliance issues. Another issue is the only private property owner involved in this project in which some cooperation may be required is Mosaic. They have not opposed the current business plan, but they did oppose its siting there. But now that the county commission has decided to proceed on that, we're working with them to understand their issues. We'll have to modify the lease at Williams Park. That's pretty straightforward. Environmental permitting, there's all deep water channels and no seagrasses. There's dredging only of historic channels. The principal issue is going to be manatees that, again, we've already had several conversations with environmental agencies, and we expect the manatee issues to be addressed through a combination of design and operational issues. There are no needs for operating subsidies because of this unprecedented private sector commitment. Honestly, I don't know why we're not on the top of a mountain calling this out to everyone. We got a transit system that doesn't require operating subsidies, and it's like, wow, that's pretty amazing stuff, but that just kind of, I don't know, something in our water. Anyways, I appreciate the invitation to be here today. We hope that we're in the environmental assessment, design, and environmental permitting as of August 7th. It is very clear that TBARTA has an integral, important, crucial role in providing connecting service from where people live to the ferry terminal. And we will work and pledge to work hand in glove to build upon that very cost-effective, flexible transportation connecting mode. And Mr. Green and I thought it was important to have this conversation for you to understand that TBARTA, at a minimum, has a very important role in facilitating that first mile connecting service, at least for the McGill service. Happy to take any questions, and sure appreciate the opportunity.
Members' questions for Ed?
I had a quick question, Chair. What is the capacity of the ferry service once it's the projected capacity of being able to move people across the bay? How many people are we talking about actually being able to use this service on a daily basis? Or
Sure. So each boat is 149 passengers. The McDill service, with 3 boats operating, because the crossing is so short, we can go back and forth pretty quickly, can move around 1,800 passengers per peak hour, for the peak commute period of 90 minutes. So that's the equivalent of a half lane of high-capacity roadway, right? longer intercity piece, the evening and weekend, we only have 4 boats and the travel time's 50 minutes. The operating commitment is to guarantee service by at least 2 boats because it is a 20-year commitment, and HMS is going to make as much of a commitment and guarantee as they can, but you could add boats to that. And the notion is to get this started, and you can incrementally add vessels. Now, the other thing is to add the size of vessels. New York City has stood up 5 ferry lines in 3 years. They ordered 29 149 passenger vessels. By the way, HMS stood up those lines, turnkeyed it, and operates the vessels. It's so successful in New York that they canceled the order of the last 8 vessels from 149 passenger boats to 349 passenger boats. So that's the other thing you can do, gain capacity by adding to the size of the boat. We started off thinking about 350 passenger boats, but the ridership survey said the far bigger variable was frequency. And while that has a higher operational cost to the operator, the demand response is amazing. So we would rather stick with the smaller boats and say, let's just add frequency to it. If you could say every 20 minutes a boat's leaving from one city going to another city, like in the evenings, that would just drive demand.
So, just further clarification for me. So transportation to me is moving people. We're moving people at a per cost. So you
Yeah.
kind of outline what the cost is to get people across the bay, which I understand. Thank you. I'm trying to decide what your forecasted model is for how many people we're actually going to be moving in this service.
Well, can we put this slide back there?
And I could probably go through the math that you just gave me, but I'm just seeing if it's been forecasted to a number, like passengers across the bay. I don't know,
Well, there's
daily or weekly basis, or
I'd have to do the math on that, and I will. We will. For the McDill trip, we have the capacity with 3 vessels is 1,788. 1,800 people per peak period. One lane of roadway can carry 2,200 vehicles. The average number of people per car is 1.1. So the peak period is about 90 minutes here. So you're talking about a capacity that would be like building a half lane of interstate from Williams Park 25 miles over to McDill. That's the equivalent lift capacity you have. The daily ridership's projected for the McDill piece to be 2,000 in year 1. HMS used Steer Consulting, which does toll roads and ridership surveys in the county. And the county wanted to see the ridership numbers. So their projections are around 2,000 daily riders initially. HMS believes they'll be far more robust. And in the case of New York City, Steer pretty strongly underestimated the numbers, as witnessed by the fact that they're adding more boats. So our projected year 1 McDill route, right, is around 1,200 to 1,800 daily riders. It may be as much as 2,000. And we project that to grow. The 4th boat will give us the ability to add more capacity. Now understand the significance of this for the strategic intermodal source system. Every single one of those riders are using either I-75 or US 41, then State Route 60, then Bayshore or Del Mabry to get to the base. So you are taking these trips off that roadway network. That's for the McDill portion. The inner city piece is really dependent upon demand. But the inner city piece is one boat, essentially, two boats, in the evenings, and two boats all through the weekends, and each boat carries 149 people every 50 minutes, for starters. We'll do the math and give that to you. I'm not sure what it was and what it would be. The FDOT would like to know and understand that as well. But clearly, the McDill run is more like the Florida Turnpike that spins off revenue that is then used to support the other service. And so we will build this intercity service as demand warrants, and we'll have the capacity to do it. Because I want to make sure I'm responsive.
Closer. Thank you.
All right.
Can I?
Yeah, let me just add to that too, in the line of the discussion, that in addition to taking capacity off the highway system, we're also reducing carbon footprints of all those cars too, which has an external,
Right.
Environmental impact, which is going to be very,
Hugely.
very significant. So I think it's a wonderful idea, but I want to get to some of the others. Pat, I think you had your.
I'll let your
Further
questions
action.
go first.
I just want to piggyback on a comment you made there. You said the McDill revenues will benefit the rest of the system. What is the break-even ridership for McDill back and forth? You already said that they could take 12 to 1,800 per day.
We're at break even with 800 daily round trip passengers.
Okay.
And so, and by the way, that's the parking lot size. The parking lot size at Williams, 750. So you can't grow the McDill service without great transit. And Hart's not in a position to provide great transit for 3 or 4 years, no matter what, because it takes that long to ramp up. But van pools can be ramped up like that. And so that's why the van pool element's so important for moving people to that site.
And if I got a few more questions, if you don't mind, Chair.
Please.
Okay. I am having a little trouble wrapping my head around the logistics of it, and so help me out if you can.
Sure.
I mean, what I'm hearing is there's a possibility for a rider from, let's say it's Valrico or somewhere, driving to a car to take a van pool, taking a van pool, hear me out, taking a van pool to the terminal, taking a ferry over, then having to jump on another, whether it's a bus or a trolley type vehicle, in order to get to work. And so I see that as 4 different moves. And so my question is it in fact 4 different moves? And then what is that time it takes somebody from Valrico to actually get from door to door?
It depends on where you are in Valrico.
Agreed.
Let's talk about Fish Hawk or Summerfield or any of those places. The drive, first of all, the bulk of the people initially are going to drive, park, take, walk. Here, you'll be the movement. But let's take Apollo Beach. I'll drive 3.4 miles, whatever it is, to Williams, park in the parking lot, walk up. I'll have my pass and go right into the waiting area. And at this point, it becomes like Southwest Airlines, right? First come, first serve. Boat rolls up, you get on, and you go off, and you disembark. And you disembark at a floating dock at McDill. The boat literally is at that dock for under a minute because it disembarks and people then are going to queue and process from the floating dock through gates onto McDill. Just like the buses, no one gets on McDill without going through security, right? On Dale Mabry, it happens at the Dale Mabry gate. If you're on a Hart bus, the security guard comes in and checks every person's pass, and if you don't have a pass, you're going back. You actually have to get off the bus and go sit at the bus stop, right? That's just the deal. So you'll process through security on McDill. We've worked through these protocols with the base and walk 147 feet to what we, at this point, believe will be some type of tram. And the tram will circulate around the base, both there and back and come back. So in the case of most of the passengers, the distance they're traveling from South County to the ferry is a distance they're traveling anyway. When they get on the base, they have to park, and they're typically walking farther from a parking garage than they would walk in this scenario. And so it's actually far more convenient for that trip, which should be the vast majority of the early trips, till we fill up the parking lot, right? In the case of the van pools typically pick people up. It's up to the van pool, and David can illuminate this more than I can, but in master plan communities, for instance, you drive to Fishhawk, the bus station, or the van pool driver comes to your house, and they have 4 to 5 to 6 people in the van pool. That's one of the reasons the van pools are so great. It picks you up, and then the vans have preference parking right at the terminal. So again, it is very competitive with the car trip. Now, if you have to drive, pick a thing up, drive, that starts being cumbersome. But we don't believe we don't think that's the major mode of transportation. Some may take it. 35% of the people surveyed said they would do what you suggested, though. But we're not. If we had to rely upon that, we would not be taking operating risk. The initial tranche of people are going to drive, park around.
Final question. You mentioned 36 million in infrastructure requirements. Will that be borne by both Hillsborough and Pinellas in terms of?
Most of those costs are in Hillsborough County. City of St. Petersburg spending, Commissioner Long may know this, like $70 million on terminals and new pier and all that. So if you look at the capital budget,
Actually, it's 80.
$18 million are ferries and trams, $20 million, give or take, is Hillsborough County terminal facilities to service the people in Hillsborough County. It would be inappropriate for Pinellas County to pay for any of that, just like it'd be inappropriate for Hillsborough to pay for theirs. At least half of the vessel miles are going between South County and McDill. The other half is split between intercity service. So it would be sensible and fair to say some pro rata portion of the vessel's cost could be shared between the governments. And that, because otherwise it wouldn't be fair. And likewise, it would not be fair for Pinellas County or St. Petersburg not to contribute to that fair share vessel cost allocation. That's just our opinion, but that's one of the things we have to sort through as we go through. So when Pinellas County and St. Petersburg looks at it and sees the benefit, that they'll decide. But we're really using the vessels. The $36.3 million is really South County to McDill. And if Pinellas County didn't want to pay for any service, they probably wouldn't get any service because it would not be fair. But again, that's something to work out.
Okay, thank you.
Pat?
Thank you. I want to thank you for the presentation. I'm so pleased that you've taken up the mantle to find a way that we could bring ferry service here regionally in every way. And I just think it's an incredible plan. Just to highlight a few things, as I always say, people talk about the great transit in Austin or Denver or Charlotte or someplace else. And this, for us, is, this is something that they cannot do in Atlanta or Charlotte or Denver or Austin or any of those other places. We have our unique opportunity that I can hardly believe that we are not using here. It's to me akin to the fact that we have our own energy source also, that we are really not using anywhere near capacity, and instead importing $58 billion a year in fossil fuels from other places. We need to use what we have in place for a low-cost, efficient, wonderful way of transporting people. I've worked on a ferry project for a number of years, and I've been through this so many times, I'm not sure quite whether it was quite pointed out, especially for people that don't have the geography maybe in their heads. When you come over from East Hillsborough County to Williams Park, and you cross on the ferry crossing is 13 minutes, right?
Yes.
So otherwise, you're talking about, when you get onto the major interstates, you're talking about a 45-minute trip around. I can tell you that the 2 times the county commission has put this away, and we've brought it back now, the hue and cry came hugely from first of all, from people down around the base who are just really tired of all the traffic piling up around the gates of the base as they wait for the processing to happen. For Hart here, we're already spending significant resources on a trip that's a really inefficient trip on our buses and everything else, because it's going across huge territory, and then it's deadhead the other way. So we're dedicating, services to a very inefficient transit solution. Being down at the base, I can tell you that the enthusiasm, and this has been for years, has been incredibly strong down at the base for this. We did have at our Hillsborough meeting, the base was there, the Tampa Chamber of Commerce, who I'm just singing.
If I can chime in.
Yeah.
The Military Affairs Committee of the Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce has been down on the base and works with both the officers and enlisted personnel. And this is the single top priority for enlisted personnel, because they tend to live in South County. And it has 95% support on the base. They are so frustrated that this hasn't happened. And if you know about the military, these folks are moving every 3 years, and they're looking for schools and affordable housing, and they got an hour-and-a-half drive, and they leave. They are on the base by 7 a.m. because they leave at 4. And so they have this extremely early schedule, because if they left a half hour later, they add 30 minutes to their commute. The surveys we got from the base employees said a huge number would actually shift when they commuted, because they want to take their children to school. It's like, come on, breaks your heart, And so it chafes me when I hear, well, this is just a benefit to people working in Billings, people serving our country, and to make their life a little better. Well, that's a really high public purpose in my view. This has huge support, and it's one of the officially adopted community partnership projects by the Department of Defense. So the base strongly supports it.
I think, was that one of 9 in the nation? I thought that's what someone had said. Yeah. The Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce came to my office and asked to meet with me. I didn't know what the topic was, but they walked in. This was about 9 months ago, and said that they had been down meeting with McDill leadership, and they offered to them and said, what can we do for you? What is it that you want that we can try to help you with? And the answer there was, get us this ferry. So they came to my office because they understood I was taking a lead role in this, and said to me, what can we do to work with you to make sure that this ferry moves the dime? So we've heard quite a bit from our Chamber of Commerce. I can also tell you that in the neighborhoods around Hillsborough County, out to the south and the east, it is very, very strong. There was a self-organized meeting now out there in Brandon, Bring the Ferry, that's happening in about 6 weeks, which I haven't even told Mr. Taranchik about yet. You're gonna have to get on your calendar. The amazing, the resiliency, the pollution, the impacts that it takes off. We have in Hillsborough County the worst, I'm not sure about Pinellas, but we have the worst air quality in the state, D and F frequently, and that's contributing from the cars. Can take about 2,000 cars off the road a day as it ramps up, we believe. That is really, really important, not only in just congestion, but also in terms of air quality and what we do and how we move towards resiliency and a better environment. I'd also, just for a minute, about the ridership from Tampa to St. Pete, because I'm not sure that you highlighted this, but the first 6 months that we brought this a few years ago, from in the evenings, or well, that was what we did this time, from Tampa to St. Pete, the highest projections were 35,000, and I think we did 42,000.
38,000.
38,000, thanks. And then this season, we skipped a year, brought it back this season for 6 months, and we did over 50,000, correct?
52,000.
And we couldn't use the convention center, unfortunately, in Tampa, so we had to do it from the aquarium, which we didn't have Sunday service at the aquarium, which we figure cut another 5,000 to 10,000 out of that. It's sold out many, many, many times. And just to be clear, what we're looking at setting up here is the McDill service that you just heard about, but also in the evenings and weekends, that service, or as you had talked about, now they're realizing that can be a more robust service also, we're looking at using these same ferries to go in the evenings and weekends from South County to Tampa to St. Petersburg and back, correct? So that would be evenings, weekends. I just think this is an incredible project. I'm very enthusiastic. I'm also, when you had your stars, the fact that we didn't recognize that there's now a Pensacola ferry that started up with BP dollars. And that has stood up already in Pensacola, full-time, year-round ferry in Pensacola, 2 ferries, that they've already stood up in the time that we've just continue to keep talking about this, but.
Slower.
So, anyway, I'm very excited about this project, moving forward. It's, use our opportunities when we have them. This is the congestion-proof opportunity. We have to move lots of people. It's an amazing opportunity for us that we have the geography and the water and the low cost. So thanks for your presentation. And I just wanted to kind of add a little bit of some information and enthusiasm
Thank you.
to get this going.
Real quick, I just wanted, and Ed, you brought up funding, FDOT funding, and you mentioned we're putting a lot of money in, you said, I think, Central and South Florida. Just also want to point out, we are putting a lot of money in Tampa Bay region.
Oh, yeah,
I think
sure.
one of the reasons the ferry was successful this year was the streetcar being free.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of people would say, I come over, I get off, I can get on the streetcar.
Right.
I think that helped, and that was one of the reasons we made it free, was to
Right.
try to generate more ridership and opportunities.
Sure.
And we also, I believe, we're the largest funder, more than any of the counties or cities, for the ferry projects.
Yeah, you pledged 450.
Right, so I just want to
Yeah.
point out that we
Oh,
are,
yeah.
and we'll continue to do that, but
Yeah.
my question really was, and maybe I didn't misunderstood it, so for future federal or state funding, you mentioned things like fixing boats and things like that. So is the vendor going to be covering operating costs for now, but you're going to apply for future state and federal funding for operating costs? I wasn't sure.
No, there's no, the operator will not.
So what would the federal and state funds in the future be?
For instance, if you wanted to expand the system, if you wanted to
Okay,
add
for
boats.
expansions and things like that?
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's, yeah.
I didn't understand what that was.
Or,
'Cause I thought like fixing the boat would be part of an operating cost.
Well, there's parts of, obviously, some elements of fixing the boats constitute major capital. Rebuilding an engine or a new engine, HMS is taking those risks. So major maintenance and major repairs covered by that operating commitment. But at the end of the 20 years, you might have to rebuild some docks or whatever things that are beyond regular, ordinary, recurring maintenance. And so you might seek federal funds. I really, from my perspective, really talking about expanding the system. FDOT MAP 21 has $30 million available every cycle for ferry service. And the Southeast, although that's changing, the Southeast has typically not had projects, but they are burgeoning. As our roadways, building bridges is a hard thing to do, as Secretary, you know. Expanding bridges is a hard thing to do. When you got the waterway there, it's like starts becoming more sensible, particularly as we grow around our waterways. New York City, the redevelopment along the waterways on the East River has been stunning. They've just turned areas that were nowhere into robust areas. And Secretary Gwynn's absolutely correct. The ferry streetcar combination has been very, very powerful. Approximately 30% of the people that got off on the ferry in Tampa went to Ybor City using the ferry. And from a regional perspective, I'm not about to suggest what local governments along the Central Avenue area in Pinellas County should do, but if you could combine the Central Avenue BRT with the ferry, you have a pretty phenomenal regional system. You could stay on the beach and go to Ybor, you could be in Ybor and go to the beach, and any place in between. And it becomes a really powerful economic driver. And the best thing we did on this was the customer survey, because it showed that ferry passengers spent prodigiously. They took these trips. And some people will say, well, that's not the purpose of transportation. Well, everyone here knows that commuter trips are a minor percentage of people on our roadways. People are going for evening events, they're going to tourism, they're doing all sorts of things. And then it's also the opportunity to start, because we only need 3 boats to run the McGill service. Off-peak provides some opportunities to do some experimentation of maybe trying some connecting service, for instance, from Bradenton to St. Petersburg. Or you can do and redeploy the fleet in different ways and grow it. The other market that may be the other potential market, it's not as strong as McGill. It is from St. Petersburg to West Shore. The problem is, once you get to wherever you might locate a terminal in West Shore, you can't get that last mile. And we're having to create that in McDill as part of our deal. But wherever you might pick a terminal in West Shore, there's just no internal circulation service. Now maybe Hart will resolve that and we'll work on that, because that would take a lot of people off the bridges, at least on a temporary basis. And it's, I went to a St. Petersburg Chamber of Commerce Transportation Committee meeting and to talk about ferries, and said the run would probably be 35 minutes from downtown St. Petersburg to West Shore. And just being apologetic about that it took that much time. And they said, that's great, because we know when we live in St. Petersburg, we would get across the bridge and to the airport or to West Shore without being stuck on Howard Franklin or Gandy. So, I think down the road, creating this capacity with an operator that's willing to innovate at its own risk, and maybe try out some different things is a really powerful opportunity that, again, the public-private partnership nature of this is pretty astounding, and I think it hasn't been highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
One final comment I would add, too, is a potential additional source of funding, or an alternative one, is the CDBG funding from HUD for disasters. And Florida's sitting on a large chunk of money now that needs to be spent on that. And we're going to get another round with a new bill that was just signed in Congress. But transportation and infrastructure are eligible for CDBG, and I know you've done a lot of
Mr. Chairman, if I can,
grant work.
tourist taxes also may be available. And I will say this about that particular topic. Understanding how HMS works and how boats work, if we have a very severe storm here, Category 3, Category 4, the first things that are going to have a lot of lift in taking first responders to Pinellas County are going to be ferries operating out of the Alafaya River, because the people will not be able to get over the roadways.
Very, very good.
And so there's in a very glum, dour circumstance, there is that element of providing, because they would put the ferries in a gunk hole right out the storm, and they're going to be the first thing that's going to be able to deploy personnel other than air across the bay, and their lift capacity is pretty substantial. So I don't take your suggestion lightly. I take it quite seriously.
Other comments?
Uh,
Mr. Kemp?
I'd just like to add that ferry service, like streetcar service, has been traditional in this region. If you look back, and I've posted pictures of our old ferry service, which got people around for a long time around here and was robust and well used in the past. In between bigger areas than all of this, so it's kind of funny that people were looking back at wanting to revive some of the kinds of transit or bemoaning the loss of streetcars and others. And this has been, for us, a traditional and well-used pattern in the past that we've lost. So I'm looking forward to bringing back a ferry service, and I think it will be robustly and well-used and be great service for us in the future.
Mr. Chairman, we are 9 days and 4 months from starting a new service, and to give credit where credit due, DOT stood up and said, we're going to make a multi-year commitment of $450,000 for the service. Hillsborough County last month voted to do 2 more years of that. And Commissioner Kemp and I were on the phone with Amir Kreisman earlier in the week, and he's going to be going to the member governments, asking them all for $300,000 over the next 2 years. So we have this semi-annual service, seasonal service for the next 2 years. And if the stars align, that will lead into permanent service, and they'll all reinforce each other under the name of the Cross Bay Ferry.
Wonderful. Members, any further comment?
One question, or comment. I heard you say Mayor Kreisman was going to be asking the member governments. He better hurry up if he's coming to Pinellas, because we've already made our first pass on the budget, and I don't recall that $300,000 figure being in there.
Well, I will pass that along. We just had a conference call just like yesterday. I can't remember.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good point, well taken, Commissioner. It's over 2 years, by the way.
I hear you,
I
but
know.
time is passing.
I appreciate that.
Ed, thank you so much for those comments. We look forward to
Thank you for all your time and thoughtful listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, Chris, you're up. Chair recognizes Chris Eaton for the comment on the web redesign.
Appreciate the chance to walk you through what the website design project is like. First of all, I am Chris Jadek, Director of Communications for TBARTA as well. I'm going to show you some of the designs as they stand right now. This is a work in progress, but we do have some significant work to show you as well. First of all, I want to start by just showing you what the current website is, and if that comes up on the screen, you'll be able to see what our current website is. There was a time in which that type of website, which, as you can tell, has a very cluttered look, was actually the way to go. The idea was you put a lot of information on your website, you gave people a lot of different places to go. But in addition to the, obviously, dysfunctionality that has crept into the website over the years, that doesn't give you a good initial impression of what a world-class transit organization should be. So we started certainly with the understanding that we can do better than that. But with any communications project, I like to identify the goals and the specific objectives. So very briefly, our objectives in laying this out with the contractor were, first of all, provide a modern and contemporary web experience that best represents a world-class transit organization. Remove that outdated content, present relevant information in conversational language that connects with multiple stakeholders, and of course, make the features easy to find, understand, and use. We also wanted to identify the audience. Who is this website for, and who are we speaking to? First of all, it's our constituents. It's the people living and working in our 5-county TBARTA region. It is certainly the local, state, federal government entities with which we work with very closely. It is the economic development interests within the 5-county TBARTA region, those who would benefit from the transit we're going to create, and of course it is our transit partners as well. With that, the design as we are building out right now looks like this. And I pause for a moment just to give you a chance to look at that and gather your own initial impressions as to what you would get when you went to tbarta.com. First of all, you'll notice we didn't emphasize any specific technical bus or boat or train car. It's actually focusing on a commuter because really that's who we're serving. Our mission is to serve people and provide them with a good commuting experience. We've come up with a tagline: Tampa Bay's regional transit future starts here. I think it's important that people have a better understanding of what TBARTA is, certainly the general public, and we do believe that that tagline helps communicate that. We also added a map of the 5-county TBARTA region, because defining what Tampa Bay is, it means different things to different people. And understanding what our TBARTA Tampa Bay region is important. So that's why we decided to include the map in there as well. Up above, you can see that there are menu items. I'm going to walk through these and give you a lot of different page views. So if you click the About TBARTA tab, you certainly see a lot of elements there. We are certainly in keeping with all the requirements of the special district of the state, our mission statement and what TBARTA is, a staff directory, and then some of the tabs, including the financial information, public records custodian for those who need to reach out first for public records requests. That information is also in the footer, which I'll show you. News releases, our partners, a lot of general information about TBARTA would be under the About tab. Second tab will be commuter services, our van pool, carpool, school pool, as well as our guaranteed ride program and other commuter services will be found under the second tab. Planning and projects under the third tab. You'll see Envision 2030 is there, along with some of the other studies we have done. By the way, I want to note that we are going to have a very robust content management server that will allow us to change and adjust this content. Well, we can't change the design. We can change what these tabs are, how many tabs there are, add page, add information, and change information as we need to. So on the second item there, where you see the Regional Catalyst Transit PD&E study, if we want to put a brand name around that, as we may do with our bus rapid transit project as it moves forward, we certainly can change some of that as well. So let's look inside the page. If you click that Envision 2030 page, this is what one of the internal pages would look like. And of course, we have a picture up there. If you continue to page down, you would find a comment box that would allow you, as you can do right now, to send us comments, engage with us, take our public survey. But we have full control over all the internal pages, such as this one, to put in whatever content we need to do for the projects we have now or might have in the future as well. And then there's a small sub-menu to the right that would allow you to go to different projects. I didn't show the complete menu off the top, but there is a floating menu that gives you the same tabs that you saw on the home page that would also appear up above there. But I clipped that off for this screen grab because I wanted to give you a closer look at what an internal page would look like. Going back to the website itself, boards and committees. This is where we'll see access to the governing board as well as all the board meetings. There will be a board calendar. It has not been built out yet, but it'll be very similar to what's on the PSTA site right now. So our meeting schedule will be accessible. It'll be a calendar that moves forwards and backwards, and we'll always archive all of our information as we do now. So presentations, minutes, approved summaries will go on to this document and be accessible to the public, as well as all the advanced meetings that we schedule as well. And of course, you can see there are additional tabs to access that information. So if we clicked on the governing board page, and this is what it would look like now. As you see, we have one open seat, but in each of those images, if you hover the mouse over it, as you did, so if we hovered over Chairman Polton, you would get two icons. One would basically allow you to click onto a biography. The other would allow you to send an email. And so if we did click on Chair Holton's picture, we would go to a biography that looks like this. And this gives you a better representation of what that menu will be, which will appear on all the pages. It is a floating menu that is available on every page that you go. There is also a tab by which you can email any one of the board members. This is very similar to the staff as well. I won't show you a staff directory, but obviously there's access to the TBARTA staff as well. But we are making some changes. It's a preliminary. One small item, you'll see that the email icon says board@tbarta.com, but that would have everybody's individual name. So it would be jim.holton@tbarta.com. It will go to a general file just as it does now. It will not change. It will work the same way, but it will look different when we post it on the website. Going back to our page, the Contact Us page, there's a staff directory, and that will be robust with information on who we are, how to get a hold of us in terms of phone numbers, email addresses as well. That is similar, also posted on the About page. It's also down on the footer, because I will tell you one thing personally, what I do when I use websites, a lot of times I want to know how to get a hold of the people at the agency. So we want to make it very easy to find who we are, not just understand what we do and get information about our projects, but hey, who do I call? I want to find out something about a project. So we're making that information available multiple areas on the website itself. Very quickly, something we're going to talk about a little bit later is we have a Spanish language translation. We talked about this briefly in the Finance Committee meeting. I do believe it's on the agenda later today. But to translate this in Spanish, if we choose to move forward with that, there would be a tab up above that would allow you to click, and then the entire website itself would translate itself into Spanish. That's something we have on our current website right now, and I do think that that would be a great benefit to a lot of people in the TBARTA region. So now I'm going to go back to the home page, and I'm going to start paging down a little bit and show you a few more things. So you can see this is really below the fold, as we say on the web page. If you page down, we're going to promote our commuter services. I think FKQ did a very nice job of creating some creative here that demonstrate a very contemporary web experience. We have language that we can change, but for now, we've put in some promotion of our van pool services. The tabs you see down below, they're very small, but it says carpool, van pool. Those will directly link to our Ride Pro sign-up services. That website is actually a portion of our current website that has recently been redesigned by Ride Pro, but that will give people immediate access to go to those pages, sign up, and learn more about our commuting services. As we continue to page down, we will have this section of the site, which is fully adjustable in terms of what content we want to do. But for now, we have an Envision 2030 placeholder there in which people can click and go directly to the Envision 2030 page. The attend a TBARTA meeting, that section could change, but I don't envision ever changing it. I think it's very important that people see and know how to go to a TBARTA meeting, and if you click that, you would go onto a calendar. I'm going to change the image out. That's just a placeholder, but one of the reasons you saw me taking some pictures earlier is I'm looking to grab some imagery for the website, so it still is in development. Then you can see we've put our Emergency Ride Home tab on the right. But this is fully changeable and adjustable. So as we have other projects, if we want to put more information up about BRT and perhaps instead of Emergency Ride Home or move some things around, we have the ability to do that. If you continue to move down, there's a section for latest news, which would have 3 of our latest news items, whether those are internal press releases that we put out about our own projects or where we've been captured in the news. We can put those down there. We're going to wait to build those out a little bit later when we get closer to launch. And then I do want to show you the footer page, which will have our TBARTA mission statement, which also is on the About TBARTA page as well. Some other helpful links, which include another link to the public meetings. If you couldn't find it up above, there's actually multiple ways to get to meetings. You can go to one of the tabs. You can go to that section I just showed you a little while ago. Or of course, you can find it down here. And of course, we have some contact information as well. We'll also note that public records request information is down on the bottom of the page, as well as our accessibility statement. We are building the site with increased accessibility to individuals with disabilities, because this is of increasing concern, certainly to public entities as well. And the public records request information, that will be on every page. So the footer exists no matter what submenu you actually go into. So taking us back to the home page, where do we stand right now? This actually represents one of what will be 9 sprints. And sprints are methods by which FKQ is incorporating content and putting it into the website. So we have 8 more of these to do, and those would populate the other sites. There has to be quality and assurance testing. They test it on multiple browsers, so it's Safari, Chrome, IE, Firefox, I believe, are the 4. It's going to be mobile compliant as well to both Apple and Android devices, so that's the work that's undergoing. We expect to have this preliminarily populated by early August. We will have final Q&A testing by which we can go through and continue to make adjustments with a launch date of August 20th planned right now. The FKQ people, I will tell you, have been very cooperative with us. I, of course, inherited this project after we had already agreed to work with them as well. And like we were talking with the Spanish language translation, I've been asking them for some different things and adding a few more things, but they've been very cooperative in working with us on this project. So I think we have a very good creative team there. And I'm going to open up for questions, but I'm going to show you one more slide before I do that. This, unrelated totally to the website, is our redesigned newsletter on the go. This is all internally created, so there's no expense to us. But we are sending out a weekly newsletter to, I think we have about 2,100 subscribers right now. In the past, the newsletter really was just sort of a conglomeration of other transit news, but the newsletter itself can also be a way in which we continue to communicate with our stakeholders. We're growing the subscription base each week with our Envision 2030 campaign. People are asking you to sign up for it. So you can see I've added, more often than not, you'll see a comment from David. You'll see some of our initiatives, as well as some of the transit news around the nation. But that is something we have redesigned recently, and I think that's a better vehicle by which we can get our communication out. With that, I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Members, questions, comments? Great informative proposal and great progress.
I appreciate it. Thank you very
so
much.
Next item of business is the Policy Committee report. Melanie is excused today, so the chair recognizes Cliff Emanuel to give that report, and I think we're going to hear from Michael Case as well.
Policy Committee met today and reviewed the proposed policy on TBARTA governing board for the reporting procedures and document retention policies that we need, and Michael gave us a very good overview. Policy Committee recommends to the board that it be adopted. And we do have Michael Case online, I believe, still to provide an overview that he provided us for your consideration today. That was our only action item today.
Michael, are you on the line?
I am on the line. Good morning, Mr. Chair, board members.
You're recognized.
This action item, as Mr. Manuel has described, has been advanced for your consideration by the Policy Committee and covers the adoption of formal written guidance for TBARTA staff specifying how we handle and report monthly operational statistics from our regional van pool program to the Federal Transit Administration's National Transit Database, or NTD. This is a combined policy and procedure, the details and background of which I will cover briefly in a moment. This will also be applicable to TBARTA staff involved in NTD reporting, as well as contractors under projects where any FTA funds are being used. So just a brief background for why this is coming to you today. Agencies receiving federal funding under FTA 5307, which TBARTA does, are required to submit data to the NTD, and FTA has some pretty specific formatting requirements to ensure that that data is held to a certain standard of quality and consistency across reporting years. TBARTA has closely followed these requirements each year, but a part of our annual report to NTD this year, for the first time, included something called an independent auditor statement of federal funding allocations, which acts like a certification testifying that we are following FTA standards for reporting, and where appropriate, have policies and procedures in place that support that accuracy and consistency that FTA demands. So this requirement, you may actually be happy to hear, is somewhat of a mark of recognition under FTA rules for having over 100 vehicles operating in service, which we do. So for as long as our program has more than 100 vehicles operating, we will need to provide this independent formal certification. Clifton Larson Allen, under their current auditing contract with TBARTA, did conduct that process this year, and I know that they're going to cover a little bit more about that in their presentation this morning. But in a nutshell, the report found us to be following all the proper procedures, but they did note two findings for resolution by TBARTA, which we've addressed in this policy procedure. The first was the absence of a written procedure for preparing, maintaining, and reporting NTD data. And we've addressed this in the document with a step-by-step procedure for reporting and maintaining ridership data, from how it's prepared by Enterprise, our third-party partner for Van Pool, when we expect to receive it from them, to how we review and validate that data, and the deadline for reporting it to the National Transit Database. Their second finding was the absence of a formal policy for retaining source documents that contain data reported to NTD. So as written in this policy, we've set the retention period at 5 years, which meets our statutory requirements for retention, and actually exceeds some of the requirements that FTA has set for this purpose. As a finance function, Melanie Williams, our senior accountant, will be the staff person primarily responsible for this policy and procedure, and she will have support from Cindy Raskin, our Director of Commuter Services. The policy procedure, as provided in your packets this morning, was also vetted through PSTA staff and our NTD analyst, who we work with very closely on reporting data both monthly and annually. Staff recommends that the governing board approve the NTD reporting procedure and document retention policy. And if you have any questions this morning, I'd be more than happy to take them.
Questions for Michael before I accept the motion to approve the recommendation? None being heard, I will accept that motion.
So moved.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Michael. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Cliff, any further comments from the policy committee?
There were some future items that we discussed. Our chair had asked that they be brought up later through the committee back to the board, and we all agreed by consensus and no other action items, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Are we going to discuss, we'll do that in the finance. Okay, any other questions for Cliff? Okay, none being heard, we'll move on to the finance committee report, and Janet Long is recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a lengthy presentation from our auditors, which they are prepared to go over with all of the board. Hopefully, you can be brief so that we don't run out of time. Clifton Larson Allen's representative.
Thank you. Yes, and I can certainly be brief since we.
Just tell us everything is terrific.
Everything's moving in the right direction. That's the good news. So, obviously, we did go over the audit report kind of in length in the finance committee meeting. At that point in time, we did discuss all the findings, recommendations as part of the audit. You also heard some of the recommendations that came out of the NTD agreed upon procedures engagement that we did. With some recommendations there, which obviously has already been acted on, which is great. And certainly, talked about some of the financial highlights and some of the, footnotes that kind of talk about where TBARTA is going. And so, certainly, clean audit report on the financial statements, which is good. Some recommendations on the compliance, which I know staff and management are working on. And it was a good audit. So if there's any questions, I'll be glad to take those. Or
Any questions?
Members' questions?
Any questions, members? No? Then can we have a motion to accept the auditor's report, please?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
And
Chair, Finance Committee, I think we were going to discuss that, to ask them for a proposal for the risk assessment.
correct, but
component.
first we were going to find out if we had additional dollars, right? Oh, no,
No,
that's
we're
for
gonna
the
have to
next
do
one.
that.
Proposal.
Okay, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yes, we discussed in the finance committee meeting about helping assist with a formal risk assessment policy, both on current operations and obviously some potential adventures as well. So certainly we'll be glad to prepare a statement of work for that and provide that to management to.
Let me solicit a motion to ask them for a proposal.
So moved.
Motion second, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Sounds great. We'll do that. Thank you.
Thank
Shall-
you.
Shall I?
Yeah, please.
So, and then we had a proposal from Chris to increase our budget by $2,150 to bring our website into the future with a translation into the Spanish language. Although, I'm not sure I'm in favor of that, considering that you left several of us out of your board page.
Time to come back again.
Well, Chris, I think, has had some discussions, as has Debbie, with Secretary Gwynn about the money involved in this. So Debbie, could you please give us a report on your discussions with DOT?
Thank you, Chair Holton. Debbie Leas, Chief Financial Officer for PSTA. Between the Finance Committee and the board meeting, I did have a chance to talk to FDOT. And at this point in time, we'll have to pay for this out of local funds, with the caveat that I will sit down and meet with them to see if we can find some funding, if applicable.
All right?
That being heard, can we get a motion
I-
to,
Well-
Can I mention something, Mr. Chair?
sure.
Not in front of you, though, however.
Do you want me to go away? This is a
I'd rather
public
you-
meeting.
I think you had your hand up first, so I'm going to go right after you. Go ahead.
Please.
Okay. My question is related specifically to the ask itself. Our existing website, you said, has currently a translation in it to Spanish.
Correct.
And we're updating that website to be consistent with the things we wanted to accomplish. But at the base services, from my perspective, this should have always been included. It could not have been overlooked. I mean, it's too much of a key component of what we're putting forward, and we currently have a website that has a translation. Now we're being asked to pay extra to have the translation back on our website. I mean, if we're going to make an ask to increase the budget, it's fine, but I think that particular topic should have been included from the beginning, from my perspective.
Appreciate that. I just add that I inherited this project 2 months ago, and the statement of work did not include that, and the explanation I received from the vendor was it was agreed to take it out in order to allow them to do the work that needed to be done at the budget we had specified. They said they could not do it. So I do agree, which is why I brought that back up. I do think that's an important thing to have.
Well,
That's why I
I'm
brought it
just
back
one
up
board
today.
member, but if it had been brought to my attention, we're going to take that component out to save $2,000, I would have not supported it. So I don't recall that, but just saying, I think from the beginning, that should have been in the base services.
Well,
I think, Janet.
I just have to make this comment for the good of the whole group, is that there were a lot of things that we were not made aware of in the past, and I dare say that under our new leadership, that is not happening any longer, right, David? Yeah. He said, but he meant yes.
Commissioner Minton.
Thank you, sir. I would echo those comments. I was going to say the exact same thing, and it's no small consternation that that was not included in the beginning. One of the things that did come out of the audit during the Finance Committee report was reading the fine print. And it's challenging when we have to come back and get nickel and dimed. I say nickel and dimed, $2,100 to be able to get the Spanish version of it. So I concur. I think we have to have it though. Right? There's no option here but to have this. But it is frustrating to not have it already included.
Well, we're taking steps, hopefully not to have a repeat of those problems. I appreciate the comments.
Thank you.
Other comments? None being heard, I will accept a motion to use local funding to pay for this.
Make that motion.
With the provision that she's going to check with DOT for reimbursement following the meeting.
Accept that.
And there, if I could add, there's another potential funding source in the $1 million that we received for the Regional Transit Development Plan. There is some additional money in there that was kind of set aside for add-ons to that project. And since Envision 2030 is a tab to the website, we potentially could use some of those funds to cover this increased cost. So we can explore that as well.
Excellent. Very good.
Also in your motion.
Okay, so we have so it's a friendly motion, so motion, second, any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Great. Janet, anything further from the Finance Committee?
No, I don't believe so. You're doing a great job.
Or you're continually recognized then for a legislative report?
Thank you very much. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Harry Glenn and Steve Palmer, our guests from Washington, D.C., who have sat so patiently through the first part of our meeting, to give us a little update on what's going on in our great capital.
Thank you, Commissioner Long. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be here again. I know you're probably running late, so we had a few slides here. We'll give you a little bit of an update on what's going on in Washington, and then Steve's going to talk a little bit about the funding situation. Now that you're starting to embark on looking at future projects, we thought it would be important for you to understand some of the challenges that you face going forward with the federal government as you're going to be looking for federal support. Oops. So, as you probably all know and have been reading, there are certain challenges that we're facing in the federal government, particularly related to Congress. Now we're in a situation with a divided government. We have the House, Democrats control the House, the Republicans control the Senate, and that has created some slowdown in legislation and in part transportation-related legislation. As you know, one of the major initiatives of this Congress was to look at an infrastructure package. There was great hope at the beginning of this Congress that there would be some forward motion on an infrastructure package. Some of the leadership, particularly on the Democrat side, proposed a $2 trillion infrastructure package over the next 10 years, have had several White House meetings, and they continue to talk, but as you well know, the breakdown in that conversation continues to be how to pay for the $2 trillion. And while there's still, I think, optimism and hope that they'll get somewhere, they've kind of leapfrogged past the infrastructure conversation, and as Steve will talk about in a few minutes, Congress is actually starting to embark on some other infrastructure-related legislation that will directly impact you, which is the reauthorization of the federal highway and transit programs. As you know, they expire at the end of next September, so Congress has a little over a year now to try and figure out how to come up with a new program. And Steve will talk to you a little bit about some of the key programs that are in that legislation that are very important to you as you look at potential funding sources going forward. So we'll talk about that. The other issue, sorry to jump back up into the middle of the page, is as we look at funding in general, there's this general concern about spending limits. Congress still continues to be under a federal sequestration program for the next 2 years. As you know, 10 years ago, Congress passed a budget agreement that would require the Congress to hit certain spending marks. If we don't hit those marks, automatic across-the-board cuts take place. We're in the process of trying to negotiate some spending caps now. If that doesn't happen between now and the end of December, Congress and the federal government will be faced with a 10% across-the-board spending cut on all federal discretionary non-defense and defense programs. So that would be a substantial problem, particularly for transit authorities if they had to face a 10% cut in federal spending. Moving ahead, as I mentioned, one of the areas that Congress is actually advancing legislation on is the appropriations process. There's a problem, as I mentioned, we don't currently have an agreement between the House, the Senate, and the White House on what the spending cap should be for fiscal year 20, which is the appropriations bills that they're working on now. Absent those agreements on a spending cap, it makes it very difficult to move these bills forward. And without an agreement to raise the spending limits, we face the threat of a sequestration. So, but the good news is that the House has actually moved forward. The House Appropriations Committee has actually passed out of committee all 12 of their regular appropriations bills. And they had a package on the floor starting this week that includes the transportation appropriations bill. And there's good news in that bill, and it's very positive that they've moved forward. And we find one of the great optimistic points here is that when we come to transportation funding and transportation authorization bills, we generally find bipartisan agreement on those programs. There's some differences around the edges, but there's been generally good bipartisan agreement, and this appropriations bill is no different. I'll talk to you about that in a second. The House was supposed to try and finish this bill this week. It made good progress, but the transportation portion will be kicked to next week. So when Commissioner Long's up there next Monday and Tuesday, she can weigh in to make sure that they continue to fund these programs. The Senate's a little bit further behind schedule. They're holding off on working on their appropriations bills until they can see if there's a spending cap decision, and so that will create a bit of a problem as we approach the end of the fiscal year, federal fiscal year, which is September 30th. So on the transportation appropriations front, again, I note that this has been a very bipartisan effort. We were in a meeting with Congressman Diaz-Balart, who is the former chairman of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee, who's now the ranking Republican, and he says that this process went no differently with him being in the minority and Congressman Price from North Carolina being the chairman. He said it's been a very good, smooth process. As we note here, they continue to fully fund the FAST Act authorized levels for transit at $13.5 billion. That's important. They also add an additional $750 million from general fund revenue to go towards FTA programs, which includes bus facilities, the Capital Investment Grant Program, and the low-no bus programs. So those are important because that is the key area, I think, that you all, and we're going to be talking to Mr. Green here after the meeting today to talk a bit about what you're looking at doing in the future. But those are the key places that you're going to be competing for funding. And so our goal continues to be, until we know exactly what projects you're looking for funding for, to make sure that the funding pools are there that they're fully funded, and that the Congress continues to push the Department of Transportation to move projects through the Capital Investment Grant Program. The other thing I will note is that in the absence of other infrastructure legislation, it is the Appropriations Committee that really has been driving transportation policy for the last couple of years. And Congressman Diaz-Balart, who is from Florida, fortunately we have good representation from Florida in the Appropriations Committee, has done a really exceptional job at pushing the administration forward to award capital investment grant programs. Steve's going to talk about some of those. There was just a BRT project announced yesterday from Minnesota, a fairly significant new project. And this is also important to you as you queue up to get ready to go through the capital investment grant program. We want to make sure that that queue continues to be, projects move through the queue so that they're in a position to take your projects and move them through the process. If we start encountering a backlog, that presents problems because the backlog just slows projects like yours from advancing forward. The other thing I will mention is that I know you represent a 5-county area. Florida has 5 members on the House Appropriations Committee now, 4 in addition to Congressman Diaz-Balart. But we're really lucky this year in that Congressman Charlie Crist, who's from Pinellas County, is a new member of the Appropriations Committee. He's got a good staff and has been very helpful. And on the Senate side, we now have Marco Rubio, for the last 3 years, has been on the Appropriations Committee. He's our first Floridian on the Appropriations Committee since Connie Mack was the state's U.S. Senator. So we have good representation on the House side and the Senate side. We have good bipartisan representation, and we have good support in the local area. I'll also note that as they get ready to do the highway and transit authorization programs next year, we do a good representation too in this area on that committee. Congressman Dan Webster has been a longtime member of that committee. Even though his district's a little further north in your coverage area, he's still been very helpful to the Tampa Bay area. He's been helpful to us on a number of projects, including Port Tampa Bay, and he's well respected on that committee. And then Ross Spano, who is a new member from the east side of your coverage area, Hillsborough County, is also on the committee now, and he's taken a great interest in these programs and continues to reach out and ask how can he be helpful. So we want to make sure that we continue to keep him up to date on what you're doing. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve. He's going to give you a little look ahead at what's going to be happening.
Thank you, Harry. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Steve Palmer, also a Vice President of Advanced Cook Associates. What I want to talk about today is kind of the FAST Act reauthorization, the Surface Transportation Bill that Harry alluded to, and then kind of what the opportunities and challenges are for TBARTA as we are, hit the ground running here on behalf of the authority. Let me just add before I get there that Harry was talking about the appropriations process has now become the de facto infrastructure bill. It's really important to mention that because, especially for transit, because the fact that they added more money from the general fund to the transportation bill, and of that additional money, $483 million are going to bus programs, is significant because it was only about 5 years ago that Congress terminated the bus and bus facility grant program. There's always going to be a fight, and this is something I should really say for the next reauthorization. There's always going to be a fight within the transit community between the rail entities and the bus entities. And in 2012, in MAP 21, the rail agencies won out. They took almost $1 billion of bus money and rolled that in. Congress did, and rolled it into the bus programs. So slowly and surely, we've been working with Bus Coalition and others to try to claw that money back, and we're about halfway there. But this additional money is a significant step forward. So the Surface Transportation Bill, known as the FAST Act, and the way I always describe it is every 5 to 6 years, Congress passes a major policy bill for transportation. That sets the policy framework, that sets the overall funding levels, and all of that money, the majority of that money for transit comes out of the Highway Trust Fund. That bill expires next September, and what's significant about that is the fact that the Highway Trust Fund is essentially broke. At the end of next year, there are two accounts, a highway account and a transit account. The transit account will be basically at zero. And if you're looking ahead, the Congressional Budget Office looked at the President's budget proposal and said, okay, knowing that where we are in the trust fund, if we're going to spend money at the same rate that we're spending it now over the next 10 years, we need $176 billion added from to the federal gas tax just to sustain current spending. Obviously, that's a significant challenge, and I don't know what that would be. I read somewhere that it's like 35 cents a gallon, but don't quote me on that. That would be needed just to sustain current spending. So, as we're looking ahead, and the President and the Congress talk about it, and the need for infrastructure, we've got a significant challenge in Washington in terms of what that means. And why is that important to TBARTA and every other transit agency? Because you mentioned earlier, Section 5307 money that you're getting, that comes from the Highway Trust Fund. If there is no more gas tax, if the gas tax can't sustain current funding or there's no increase, every agency, including TBARTA, will then receive a significantly reduced allocation of that money. So what can Congress do to change that? Well, they're obvious. You can either raise the gas tax, you can transition to vehicle miles traveled, which is something that people talk about a lot. Most people who know about it, though, say it's not ready for full nationwide implementation right now. That it's being tested in Oregon. They've got a number of different avenues to try to collect that tax, but none of them have proven to be 100% successful, as efficient as a gas tax is collected. Tolling and private sector investment are great for certain highway segments, but they're not going to work for transit. So, the other alternative, you cut spending. And the other dilemma we're going to have is that last bullet, the fact that this reauthorization expires 5 weeks before the 2020 presidential election. So we're more than likely going to be looking at an extension. You may say, well, that's no big deal. We could have a 6-month extension, but it's going to cost billions of dollars in new revenue to be able to just get an extension. And the last time in the FAST Act 4 years ago now, Congress did things like raided money from the Federal Reserve profits, took money revenue from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. They weren't exactly user fee funds, and we could see some more of that happening, and that does then challenge us to then possibly lead to the elimination of the Highway Trust Fund at some point in time, where all the highway and transit programs would compete across the board in the general fund. I'm not predicting that, but it certainly is possible. Our last slide, it really is just, okay, I mentioned TBARTA opportunities and challenges. So you're perfectly positioned right now in terms of where you are. As we understand that the initial steps anyway are looking at BRT. There's no guarantee that's the direction you as a board will take things. But this administration really likes the bus rapid transit program. They're concerned that if they invest heavily into rail programs, the long lead time it takes to get there, technologies could change. 10 years ago, we didn't know about Uber and Lyft. And look at how they've changed, the TNCs have really changed mobility in urban areas right now. Florida is going to be a state that the president's going to be looking and the administration is going to be looking to help. And in my 20 years of being a lobbyist, we've leveraged a lot of different areas to succeed in getting more money as a result of a presidential election and a senatorial election. And I think the fact that you now have 5 counties, as Harry was pointing out, you have a significant political base to draw upon in Washington. You do have some challenges. You need to educate people in Washington about, that's what we're here for, to help you with. Educate people in Washington to who TBARTA is and what your mission is. That's not just the delegation, it's the Federal Transit Administration, it's the Secretary of Transportation, it's the committees of jurisdiction. As they look ahead and try to plan their future on how they're going to spend their money, we need to be at the table and helping to educate them. And there's incredible interest in trying to do these bus rapid transit and rail projects around the country. So we will be, assuming the program moves ahead, these programs move ahead like we're going to push for, we're going to have to work hard to make sure the project is as competitive as possible. So with that, members of the board, we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Members,
I know you had a
questions
long
for
morning.
the team? Thank you so much for that report.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Long, anything further from the legislative subcommittee?
No, but we will be bringing forward to you recommendations for our legislative package next year once we complete our budget preparations and have more detailed information with regard to what our asks will be. So stay tuned. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Bill Johnson to give the Citizens Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I have a brief report. The Citizens Advisory Committee met on June 9th here at Hart, and we did have a quorum. There were no action items on our agenda to consider, so we have no recommendations to pass on to you today. As part of the Envision 2030 Regional Transit Development Plan, we did receive a report of the baseline conditions phase activities to date. We also received a presentation on the TBARTA Commuter Services Program, great program. The last major update that we did receive was on the Catalyst PD&E project and the planned activities for the upcoming 6 months. During the update on the last legislative session, the committee members asked me to remind you of our previous offer. The committee members reaffirmed our offer to assist you with the TBARTA's legislative advocacy efforts. So if we can be of assistance to you, let us know. Our next meeting will be August 21st in the PSTA auditorium. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, questions for Bill? Thank you, Bill. We do not have a Transit Management Committee report today. Next up is my report, and I'll be brief. All things look good for our bill to be signed, our appropriations. I had occasion to meet with the governor on Wednesday, and he did not commit one way or the other, obviously, but said it's under review. His policy director, Chris Spencer, also seemed to be positive about it, although they didn't commit to it. But all signs are that everything is in order and going to be signed. And of course, the legislature and our advocates there have been calling the governor's office to encourage signing. So I think all things are a go on that. We can't say definitively yet, but hopefully we'll know in the next few days. So that is my report, and I will now recognize David for the executive director.
Thank you. I know we're approaching noon, so I'll be brief as well. But I do want to thank you all for making yourselves available to meet with Scott Pringle and me to discuss the PD&E of the regional BRT project and review work that was performed under the regional transit feasibility plan. We received a lot of really great comments from you all that we'll now be able to take with us as we move into next steps, which will involve meetings about the number of stations, station locations, and discussions about stakeholder coordination and scheduling public outreach. We are planning to present you all an update on work on that project at our August board meeting. We're also making great progress with Envision 2030. We've completed 5 outreach events and have one more that's scheduled in Manatee at the Red Barn Flea Market. We've compiled preliminary results of the online survey along with a zip code analysis of where the surveys were taken. That survey will remain open through the July 4th weekend, and we are doing one final push with some media buys to blanket the entire 5-county area with a special emphasis on those particular areas that have been underrepresented so far. Next steps related to Envision 2030 involve an evaluation of existing services throughout the 5-county area, a peer review of other regional transit agencies, and identification of alternatives for improving existing regional transit services. Our next presentation to the board to update you all on Envision 2030 will be at the September board meeting. I want to thank Chris for giving an update on the website redevelopment project. He did mention during his presentation an item of interest related to the Ride Pro web interface. And I want to highlight that. Ride Pro, for those who may not be aware of it, is the platform that people use when searching for a van pool or a carpool. They actually begin that process from TBARTA's website, and then they're redirected to another site through an interface in order to actually enter their data and conduct that search. Cindy and her team have updated the look and feel and the functionality of that particular page, which might not sound like a big deal, but we're excited about it because it really hadn't been updated in more than 10 years. And as we are updating the look and functionality of TBARTA's website, it only made sense to do that as well. So we're really pleased with how that turned out. Some other improvements that we're making within commuter services include finalizing a work plan that'll recommend improvements to commuter-assisted programs and services, and will also include an outreach plan, restructuring of our emergency ride home program, and also provide some marketing tools and tactics. We received a great finance report earlier. I'm happy to say that we are making good progress on our fiscal year 2020 operating budget. We've done a lot of work internally. Melanie has kind of spearheaded work on this and has received a lot of input from staff already. We've done several internal meetings, and Melanie and I will review by the end of June progress on where our operating budget stands for 2020. We will then take that information and review that with Debbie Leas throughout the month of July. And our plan is to bring a proposed operating budget to the Finance Committee and Board at our August board meeting for you all to consider. Some items for our July board meeting include the presentation from Virgin Trains and Bob O'Malley. We have confirmed with him his availability for July, so he will be back to do that presentation that he wasn't able to complete. I believe it was back in March. We will also have a presentation from Enterprise to address Vanpool-related comments and questions that we received back during our May board meeting. And we will also coordinate a presentation with FDOT on congestion management lanes and express service in South Florida. And we're not sure of their availability for that presentation. That was also a holdover, or a carry forward, I should say, from comments at our May meeting. But we'll try to coordinate it. If not for July, we'll do that in August. And I have made note from our committee meetings earlier, the preference to continue having committee meetings on the same day as the board meetings. So we will reschedule the remaining committee meetings for the rest of the year to accommodate that preference. So if there are no questions for me, that's all I have.
Any questions or comments for David? Commissioner Kemp, to your point, you might want to get with Dave with some of the ideas that you had in terms of future presentations too, in terms of the overall matrix of transit and opportunities throughout the state. So I think that's probably a good idea. Is there any new business for the good of the order? Okay, none being heard, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second? Without objection, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Oh, okay. Yes, we can make it other than that.